very much. Appreciate it. There we go. Yep. Good evening. So good to be with you all. I'll try not to speak too loud because I really probably don't need a traveling mic in a room this size. I'm kind of loud. But if you think I'm loud, you ought to hear my cousin. I'll leave it at that. He's much louder than me. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here with you all tonight. I appreciate the fact that I'm able to be back in West Virginia. Julie and I came to West Virginia from Iowa, and I started out in West Virginia, in Reesville, West Virginia, where I went to high school. Now, mind you, before that, I'm an Army brat, so I was born in Germany and did most of my growing up in Virginia. But I do consider West Virginia to be my home, and coming back to Elkins, West Virginia, this is the first time I've been able to preach within the state of West Virginia, and I think I'm staying. I like it too much. I'm enjoying it. It really, truly is being at home, and that's good. If they'll keep me, I would like to stay. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on Revelation. Tonight, if I was not asked by Clint to come here and speak, I would have been preaching on Revelation chapter 20, down the latter part of chapter 20, talking about the white throne judgment. Because we've been in Revelation for weeks and weeks and weeks. I do a verse-by-verse study of the books when I teach them, and I think we've been in there probably close to a year in Revelation, if not more. But we started out from chapter 1, verse 1, and now we're in chapter 20. And I kept telling the congregation that the study will go faster once we get past the letters to the 7 churches of Asia. And it does. It goes faster. In comparison to how I normally teach. That's not saying a whole lot, but it does go faster once I get into those chapters. And we were actually getting to the point where we were doing the chapter a week. So maybe it hasn't been quite a year. I don't remember when we started. But I've only been at Elkins for a little over a year. We got there in March 17th of last year, right as West Virginia was closing all the doors. And we were not even able to preach at the building that first Sunday. We immediately started a daily Bible study on the Thursday of that week, whatever that would have been, and we've been doing it ever since. Only a small fraction of the days did we have to miss our Bible study, and then we started back at the building in May of last year. Well, we still kept doing the daily Bible study, and I'm glad to say that we're doing that. I don't think we would have had that opportunity otherwise. Turn with me in your Bibles, if you will, to Revelation chapter 2. Revelation chapter 2. If I was to choose, I think I told Clint this when he mentioned it to me. If I was to choose which of the churches of the 7 churches of Asia that I was going to be able to do the letter to, it would have been Smyrna. And lo and behold, when Clint asked me to speak and he told me what my topic was going to be, I was all smiles. Because I like the church at Smyrna. I could have taught any one of those. But to me, you know how that is. Preachers always have soapboxes that they stand on. Well, this particular church has a particular soapbox of mine that I like to talk about. I was given the option last year or the year before to speak at a lectureship, and they asked me what I wanted to talk on. And sure as I'll get out, what I wanted to talk on is a subject close to what we're going to be seeing here with Smyrna. I'll let you know when we get there. But in this letter, now, by the way, also, I wish I could have been here last week to hear the speaker last week. There may be a couple of things that I repeat that the speaker last week said, and no doubt the speakers for the other churches are going to be mentioning things, but I just don't know how the speaker last week handled it. And there are portions of it, especially the salutation and then the ending remarks to each letter, that are very similar to each other. And so you may find each one of us who are preaching on the 7 churches of Asia that we're going to keep repeating several things. Well, all that means is by the time we get done, you'll know those particular things real well. But look with me, if you will. What I want to do first is I want to read our verses that we are going to be going over. So look with me, if you will, Revelation chapter 2. We're going to be starting there in verse 8 and reading through to the end of his message to verse 8, to Smyrna, Revelation chapter 2, verse 8 through 11. Read with me, if you will. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the first and the last, who was dead and who has come to life, says this, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison, so that you will be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. Okay, the way this particular letter starts out, to the angel of the church of Smyrna. You know, one of my soapboxes, this is not the one I mentioned a moment ago, but one of my soapboxes is not translated words, but transliterated words. What does the word transliterated mean? Just to give you an idea, baptism is a transliterated word. What does transliterated mean?
It's a word that's just the Greek word made a little bit easier to read in English.
Yeah. Baptism, for instance, comes from the Greek word baptismo. Okay, depending on which form of whether noun, adjective, or whatever. But anyway, baptism comes from the Greek word baptizo. Okay, all they did was they took the latter part of the Greek word off and they put an M on there, and suddenly you have baptism. All right? The same thing is true about the word angel. What does the word angel mean? I mean, literally, what does the Greek word for angel mean? Messenger. Excellent. This is the Greek word angelos. For instance, and normally this word is transliterated in our Bibles. It's brought from the Greek straight over into English. Again, you can see how they did that. They just took the OS off the end of it and threw on an L, and you got angel, all right, instead of angelos. So that word messenger, like I said, normally you have that word for messenger, angel, transliterated in the Bible. There is a couple of times where it's translated. For instance, when John sent messengers to Jesus, two people to Jesus to talk to him, as they are leaving after Jesus Christ speaks to them, the text tells us that John's angels were leaving. Actually, the English text says John's messengers as they were leaving. Okay? Guess what word is there? Angelos. And I would prefer that every single Greek word in our New Testament, and for that matter, the Old Testament, but especially the New Testament, I would have preferred if each and every one of those Greek words would have been translated instead of transliterated. Another one, for instance, Christ is a transliterated word. If they would have translated the word Christ, it would have said anointed one. Instead of saying Christ, which I'm convinced that many people just think that was Joseph's last name, and Jesus got the last name Christ. You know, Joseph and Mary Christ, son of the parents of Jesus Christ. All right? Well, I'm sure there's people out there who believe something along those lines. But the word merely means anointed one. It is the equivalent, the Greek equivalent of the Old Testament word that is normally transliterated into Messiah. I think the Greek form of the Hebrew word is Mashiach, if I remember right. But the whole point of it is Messiah doesn't mean anything to us. Christ doesn't mean anything to us. Well, I guess it does mean something to us to a certain extent, but it doesn't mean what the words are saying. It means anointed one. Well, the same, and normally with every single transliterated word, this is amazing if you think about it. If you go through and check the transliterated words, you will normally find one of two things, or maybe both. One, You'll find ignorance because we didn't realize that word means something. It's just something that we see all the time, and we've just put it there like Jesus Christ, as if it's his last name. Instead it's saying Jesus the Anointed One, which means he's the one that God has chosen. Okay? Or it could be, I said, ignorance on it. Or two, a false teaching. Just about every transliterated word out there has a false teaching. Like, for instance, you and I know real easily that baptism has a lot of false teaching towards it, don't it? If only they would have translated the word and said immersion, I wonder if we would have ever had something like sprinkling or pouring being called baptism. Well, the Greek word we have here for angel also has its difficulties. I don't know what the individual who taught on the Church of Ephesus said last week about who this angel is. Well, read verse 1 again and put the word messenger. Let me read that again. And to the messenger of the church in Smyrna, write, the first and the last, who was dead and has come to life, says this. Now that puts a totally different flavor on it. People get the idea that, well, I wonder, does every church have an angel? And if Barrickville has an angel, I wonder what his name is. Okay, well, let me tell you what his name is. Clint. He's your angel. Or, so he doesn't get such a big head, we'll say, he's your messenger. That's all the word means. If you look back in chapter 1, turn back to chapter 1 with me real quick, and this is something that I think that reinforces what I believe this is showing. Look at verse 3 of chapter 1. Look what it says. Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of this prophecy and heed the things which are written in it, for the time is near. Now, isn't that interesting? Singular, he who reads, and plural, those who hear. Well, why would it say it that way? Why not those that read and those that hear? Well, for a very obvious reason. If you get a letter in the mail to a big group of people, not everyone has to stand there and read it. You have one individual read it, and the rest of the people hear it. And he's probably talking about the messengers there. He who reads and those who hear. And so when Jesus is saying to the messenger of Smyrna, write, he's saying, have the messenger say these things. That's all we're seeing. And so a false doctrine, a wondering, back in the 90s especially, there was a big angel theology out there. People were just fascinated by the idea of angels. You get to all these different questions, especially those people who come close to, and perhaps not even just close to is the word, worshiping angels, really get a kick out of the idea of whether or not every church has its own angel. Well, if you look at Hebrews chapter 1, let me just quite frankly say, the very last verse in Hebrews chapter 1, we find out that all of us have our angels who serve us. Read the last verse of Hebrews chapter 1. We have heavenly beings who serve us. Now, there's a whole lot of theology on that as well that the Bible doesn't say. I'm not going to go into a lot of things about guardian angels. A lot of people have a lot of information about guardian angels. But there isn't enough information from the New Testament to tell us what these angels do. But the last verse of Hebrews chapter 1 says they serve us. Okay. Now, so that idea, to the messenger of the church in Smyrna, write. All right. This is just something that Jesus is telling John, this is what I want them to know. The description that Jesus gives of himself. Pretty much every time the churches have a description, or Jesus speaks to each one of these churches, there's a description given. Normally it comes from chapter 1. If you look back and see where Jesus calls himself this, he does call himself the first and the last, who was dead and come to life, says this. Again, Jesus uses this description of himself that John noted in the first chapter. Jesus describes himself with descriptions that point to his eternal nature and his resurrection. He's the first and the last. There's also places in the first chapter where he also says the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. And all that speaks about is Jesus was in the beginning, Jesus will be in the end. And that's because it speaks of his eternal nature. God the Father is in the beginning. God the Father will be in the end. The Holy Spirit was in the beginning. Holy Spirit is in the end. That's the eternal nature of God. Now, this would be a comforting thing to Smyrna, especially the other thing, who has come to life, who was dead and has come to life. Speaking of Jesus Christ's resurrection, that would be a very important thing to the church in Smyrna, because Jesus is getting ready to tell them, you're going to be persecuted, and you need to be faithful until death. We'll say a little bit more about that when it comes up. But for some of them, that faithful until death might not have been all that long a time, because many Christians were persecuted to the point of death. And when you get to Revelation chapter 6, you hear about those martyrs who are under the altar in the heavenly vision that John sees. They ask a question, how long until you take revenge, bring vengeance for what was done to us? That's in Revelation chapter 6, the fifth seal. And so some of those people who are under that altar crying out to God may very well be people who were in Smyrna, and God's going to tell them, you're going to go through persecution, and you must be faithful until death. Okay? So the very fact that Jesus Christ points to his resurrection, his eternal nature and his resurrection, probably is a comforting thing for what Smyrna is getting ready to hear. Verse 9, I know your tribulation and poverty. Okay, first those two words, I know. I believe every single one of the churches hear those words. I know, if you look at those 7 letters to those 7 churches. Now, this idea of knowing that Jesus Christ knows can be a good thing if you're doing the right thing. He also uses that I know and points out the bad things they're doing. Now, Smyrna happens to be like Philadelphia. 2 of the churches in these 7 churches are never told anything bad that's going on in their congregations. Doesn't mean there wasn't sin in Smyrna or there wasn't sin in Philadelphia. It just wasn't an overriding thing for those congregations. And so Jesus Christ didn't feel like he needed to straighten anything out big time in Smyrna or in Philadelphia. One of the churches never hears any good thing about them, and that's Laodicea. All right? But the other churches, was that 3 out of 4? The other 4 churches hear both good and bad things about them. And so when Jesus Christ says, I know, for Smyrna, this is a good thing. Jesus Christ knows. He's getting ready to say, your tribulation and your poverty. He knows what's going on with us. He knows how we are being treated. He knows our situation in our lives. Okay? Pretty much your tribulation and your poverty, John is describing a pretty sad situation for the church in Smyrna. Here we see that just because you're a Christian doesn't surely guarantee that that they will be without trouble in this life. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean there won't be any trouble. Probably most preachers have had someone come up to them and say, you know what, I've decided I need to become a Christian because I want to tell you what, things are going really rough in my life right now, and I need to make my life right so things will go well. And I don't want people to have the wrong idea when they become Christians. I say, well, if you're wanting things to go right by becoming a Christian, you need to understand something. You become a Christian, you're going to make Satan mad. Think about the life of Jesus Christ. He never sinned. So nothing bad ever happened to Jesus Christ, right? I'm not just talking about his death on the cross, the beating he got before he went there. I'm talking about the way he was treated during his ministry by the leaders of God's people. Jesus Christ suffered a lot while he was on this earth. Jesus Christ, remember what he said about his wealth? The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He was poor. He was born in a barn, all right, in a stable. And he was laid there to be greeted by shepherds who came to see him. Jesus Christ was not born in a palace. He did not have all the wonderful things of life. He wasn't even born in our century when you have hot and cold running water in the house. All right, he didn't have a lot of things when he was born in this world, and he also suffered a great deal besides what happened to him on the cross. Jesus Christ went through a real difficult time. And so when Jesus Christ is telling them, I know your tribulation and poverty, I guess maybe the people in Smyrna said, well, why don't you do something about that? He is doing something about that. He's preparing an eternal home for them. That's what he's doing about that. It's not about our lives on this earth. And it's real easy for us to get caught up in my life on this earth must be a wonderful thing. No, the wonderful thing comes later. Now, James chapter 1, down around verse 17, I believe it is where we find out that all good and perfect gifts come down from the Father of lights above. And quite frankly, you and I do have some wonderful things. I don't care what your social status is on this earth. Just the very day and time we live in is a wonderful thing. Just the country that we live in as opposed to other countries around the world is a wonderful thing. And so the idea of whether or not we have wonderful things, we do. But we also have struggles. We also have problems. It's a world of sin and death and pain. And that, by the way, is taken care of in Revelation chapter 21 when you get there. God's got a plan for that. But it's not on this earth. We're the ones who mess the earth up, and I'm not talking about environmental issues. I'm talking about sin and the penalty for that sin. We're the ones who messed the earth up. God is fixing that by preparing another place for us to live. And so Jesus Christ says, I know your tribulations and the blasphemy of those who are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Okay? Oh, I skipped over you are rich. I know your poverty, but you are rich. Obviously, when Jesus Christ says that, he's speaking about their spiritual richness. And again, this is an attitude shift. A lot of times we're just really concerned about where we're going to get our next meal or whether or not we're going to be able to afford that vacation or whether, just build up to whatever people worry about. We're always worried about something as far as that we want to do on this earth. So sometimes we may think, I wish I had a lot more money. And quite frankly, that might be a nice thing. But Jesus Christ makes it clear here, speaking through John, that you're rich. You are. And what they're rich in is the blessings from God, the spiritual blessing of being saved, and their recognition of what is most important and the fact that they are working towards that. That's what's making them, causing them to be recognized by Jesus Christ as rich. And so he says, you are poor, yet you are rich. And the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not. Now, the word blasphemy, that's another word, by the way, that's a transliterated word. Blasphemos, I believe is what it is, but whatever the fact. It's just brought right over into the Greek, and because of that, it's got this little foggy look at it of what does it possibly mean. A lot of people get the idea that the only kind of blasphemy, the only way there is blasphemy, is to do something that is against God or do something that is even against something sacred, maybe is a way of saying that. That's not what the word blasphemy means. The Greek word for blasphemy merely means to speech that injures. When someone says something to hurt your feelings, they blasphemed against you. That's all the word means. Speech that injures. I did that a lot of times with my little sister when I was growing up. I blasphemed her a lot. And it doesn't require four-letter words to be blasphemy. It's just speech that injures. That's all the word means. And so again, because this Greek word wasn't translated, but was transliterated and brought into our English language and merely says blasphemy, we are like, well, they must have really did something horrible. Well, what they were doing was horrible. I don't want to take away from that. But all they had to do was call him, what did Jesus say, Raka? Anyone who calls his brother Raka, guess what you just did? You blasphemed him. You said speech that injures. That's all the word means. And so now we need to know the context. The blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not. Now, that idea of saying they are Jews and are not. I don't have time to go and look at this, but let me give you the references. Especially Romans chapter 9, verses 6 through 8. Let me mention that one especially. Romans chapter 9, 6 through 8 is where Paul the Apostle points out that there are many who are Israelites who are not really Israelites. All right? What he means by that phrase, the way he says it in those verses, is they are children of Abraham, and they have come through Isaac and then Jacob, which is most important, and then they went on and were parts of those 10 tribes. But they're not Israelites. Why? Because the old covenant has been nailed to the cross, Colossians chapter 2. That division wall has been torn down, Ephesians chapter 2. Then what that division wall was the old covenant, which caused there to be a chosen people of God that were known as the Israelites or the Jews. Well, they're no longer God's chosen people. How are we God's chosen people today? By accepting the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, there's a lot of people, I see commercials on TV all the time about how God commanded us to take care of his children. And what they're talking about is the Israelites. They are not God's chosen people anymore. When that law was nailed to the cross, Colossians chapter 2, when that dividing wall was taken away, Ephesians chapter 2, Paul the Apostle there says, now you Gentiles who were afar off now can come to Christ. You had no connection to God, no connection to the commonwealth of Israel. Now who are the Israelites? All of us in this room who are Christians. Galatians chapter 3 makes it clear that we have been baptized into Christ. We have been clothed with Christ. And therefore now there is neither Jew, nor Greek, nor bond, nor freeman, nor male, nor female. We are all one in Christ. When we become Christians, we become spiritual Israelites. And so when Jesus says here, those who say they are Jews and are not, he's probably talking about physical descendants of Abraham through Jacob, one of the 12 tribes who are never accepted Jesus Christ. You see that all the time with Paul the Apostle during his missionary journeys. Ephesus especially, by the way, which is just right nearby Smyrna. Smyrna is the next city down from Ephesus. Ephesus, by the way, there was a riot. Do you remember in Ephesus? You remember the problems that the Jews caused Jesus? Well, in that riot, it wasn't the Jews. But you remember the problem that the Jews caused Paul all the way through his ministry, trying to stop what he was doing. They didn't want to accept Jesus Christ, Jesus as the anointed one. They did not want to consider him Messiah. And Paul the Apostle was teaching him Messiah as Messiah. Well, the same situation seems to be going on here. These Jews who are not, they had not become Christians, are blaspheming them, hurting them with speech. And even more, look at what he says about them. They say they're Jews and they are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Now, that idea of them being a synagogue of Satan, boy, I am running out of time, aren't I? 5 minutes? Okay. That idea of them being a synagogue of Satan. Let me be real quick here. You know, that's really tough, isn't it? Jesus Christ said, you either serve God or you're serving mammon. You can't have two different gods you follow. Well, the idea of them being the synagogue of Satan is showing that Jesus is being very blunt. They think they're following God. They're following Satan. You know, in Colossians chapter 1, verse 13, we are told there that Paul says that God has brought you out of the domain of darkness into the kingdom of his beloved Son. In other words, they all used to be part of Satan's dominion. That's the only point being made here. If you are not of Christ, and you have come to the age of recognizing right and wrong and therefore have sinned, you are not part of God's kingdom. You're part of Satan's. Making that choice by sinning. Okay, verse 10. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Okay, there's that idea of suffering again. That word fear there is the word phobos, where we get the word phobia. All right? That means fear. Like we do. Arachnophobia, you're afraid of spiders. Okay, that's all that means. So this is not a word that merely means respect. Sometimes this word is used towards God. In fact, Jesus uses it in Matthew chapter 10, verse 28. Do not fear the one, phobia. Do not fear the one who can destroy the body, but fear, phobos. Phobia is what we get out of it. Phobos, the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. To fear him. Yes, perfect love casts out fear. But what about when I don't have that perfect love? That fear is something that motivates me to do God's will. And so Jesus Christ is saying, don't fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil's about to cast some of you into prison, that you may be tested. Now, there's the reason they're going to be cast into prison. Can Satan do anything that God doesn't allow him to do? Remember Job? God had to allow Satan to do what he did to Job. When you really think about it, anything that's done to us by Satan, God allowed it. It couldn't happen if God didn't allow it. Now, in places like James chapter 1, the first 6 or 7 verses, we come to find out that those things happen to us to build up perseverance. For what? For the next trial that's going to come along, James tells us. You need that perseverance for that. And so the same thing's happening here. You're going to be tested, just like Job was. And God was allowing it. God requires his people to follow him. You will have tribulation 10 days. Now, I don't know how much you've all talked about numerology yet, but this is not just saying, well, it's only going to last 10 days. When you get to day 9, you know it's almost over. That's not what he's saying. 10 is merely the number that means a number of completion. There's a fullness of persecution that you're going to have to go through. That's all that means. Doesn't tell them how long it's going to last. Just a fullness of persecution. So you're going to go through it all. You are going to be required to go through it all. You will have tribulation 10 days, but be faithful until death. Well, I put the but in there. Be faithful until death, and I'll give you the crown of life. Now that crown there is the Stephanos, the victory crown. You will have won. Okay? There's 2 different crowns mentioned in Revelation. One is the Stephanos, the other one is the diadem. The diadem is what Jesus wears when he's showing up on the white horse near the end. In fact, he has many diadems. Okay? He is over all. He has been given authority over heaven and on earth, all heaven and earth. And so Jesus Christ has all authority. That's why he has many diadems. Well, this is the word Stephanos. This is the wreath-like crown that they would wear in the Olympics because they were the victor. They won against all. This is what he's talking about here. You will receive the wreath-like crown, showing your victory. And that victory comes from Jesus Christ. If you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, he deals with that idea of them being victors, okay, over death. Oh, death, where is your victory? Oh, death, where is your sting? And he goes on to say victory is in Jesus Christ. Okay. The devil is about to cast some of you in prison that you may be tested. You will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful to death. I'll give you the crown of life. Next verse. Verse 11. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. Now, the first thing is everyone has ears, so listen up, all right? And the second one says, he who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. Now, in Revelation 21:8, we find out what the second death is. It's always best to have the Bible define itself. In Revelation 21:8, the second death is being thrown into the lake of fire. So the one who basically Jesus Christ is saying, if you overcome, you won't go to hell. What if they don't overcome? By the way, he's talking to Christians, right? Once saved, always saved. So I don't have to worry about going to hell. Some people in this world would say. But Jesus Christ, talking to Christians, says, if you overcome, you will not be cast into hell. You will not suffer the second death. So in other words, it isn't once saved, always saved. It is the idea of being faithful until death. Finally. Oh, that was it. Hey, I did it. I don't see kids running in here, so they haven't done that yet. Oh, they came in? I just didn't pay attention to them coming in. Okay. All right. I just didn't pay attention to them coming in. All right. You say I go right into the. Oh. Okay. Good. Good deal.
Maybe they'll sit and fan in the wings if they hear you talk.
Okay. All right.
Then you get right into
Okay. Good deal.
pretty much when Annie comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So she's the one. Okay. She's the one who decides. Gotcha.